on the new regulations for the new due diligence regulations for the responsible sourcing of gold. It's great to have so many attendees joining. We're also joined by Abid Chapan from the UAE Ministry of Economy and Mumtha, the General Manager from the Dubai Jewellery Group, who will provide their insights along with KPMG on the new regulations, which were dated August 22 and become effective as of the 1st of January 2023. So a quick introduction to the why of the regulations. Obviously, the UAE is a major trader in gold. It is one of the major imports for the UAE economy. And historically, the UAE has attracted some criticism from NGOs, the LBMA and others around the responsible sourcing of gold and compliance. But really, at this time, gold forms and precious metals form a attractive vehicle for money laundering, and with the UAE entering the grey list by the FATF grey list last year, there has been increased commitment from the UAE government to ensure that the UAE is complying with all its international obligations in relation to the effectiveness of our anti-money laundering regimes. These new regulations comply with the OECD guidance and FATF guidance and really align with those. But in addition to compliance and meeting our obligations as the UAE, it also forms an opportunity in demonstrating effective compliance and effectiveness could be a competitive advantage for the UAE to increase our share of primary gold production and refining moving forward, in addition to the dominance that we have in artisanal gold refining. So without further ado, I'll just introduce the different speakers who are going to run us through the detail of the regulations and what that may mean for you. Firstly, it's very good to have Abid Chapan on the call. He's an anti-money laundering expert from the UAE Ministry of Economy, and who's going to be taking us through some of the detail of the regulation and what needs to be complied with. Mumtha is the General Manager of the Dubai Jewellery Group. Welcome, Mumtha, and I look forward to your insights in relation to what this means for many of the members on the call. I'm the Head of Forensic and Third-Party Risk Management for KPMG in the UAE and Middle East. Our practice specialises in third-party due diligence and due diligence frameworks, in addition to in AML, KYC reviews and looking at third parties and their compliance. I'm very pleased to also be joined by two of my specialists, Satchith. Satch is the director and really leads our AML and financial crime team for KPMG in the UAE. He's going to be providing his insights, along with Anton, who leads our third-party risk management and corporate intelligence function within KPMG. Anton is a specialist in the due diligence of suppliers within your supply chain. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Satch, who's going to take us through some of the highlights of the new regulation.
Thank you very much, Nick. Pleasure to be speaking to everyone this morning. I really want to start off with talking about the genesis of the regulations and why the regulations are in place. I think that's always important to understand, especially when you're sort of there working on your day-to-day, whether you're part of a refinery or whether you're part of a jewelry group. When you're sort of in your details on a day-to-day basis, it's important. Some of these regulations might seem, oh, why do I have to do this? It's not part of my work. It's annoying for me to do. It requires me to spend more time on something. I might be annoying a customer. I might be, it's just sort of more work. So it's important to understand, I think, why these regulations, these new regulations, along with the other suite of regulations that we have in relation to AML and financial crime, is there in place in the UAE. And that reason is important. Anton, if you go on to the next slide. Um, I mean, I don't really need to sort of speak to everyone here about how big the UAE, the gold trade is in the UAE, and how important it is for everyone here. Everyone's here because everyone's in the industry. Everyone understands how big UAE is in the sort of the global context when it comes to gold trading, gold refineries, anything in that this thing, and not just gold, I should say, just across precious metals, other precious metals as well. But that's why having that sort of high sort of risk sector performing so well is one of the reasons why you have the spotlight on UAE. And Nick previously mentioned about the spotlight that's come through from the UK, and there's some other regulators also looking very closely at UAE and what UAE is doing at a governmental level and what they're doing at sort of jeweler levels, refiner levels, to understand, well, what's the risk that UAE is going to pose on us, and what's the risk that UAE is being used as a country to launder money, commit other financial crime. That is really why these regulations are in place. It's really to set up that good governance, that framework that enables all of us to identify those bad actors, push them out of the UAE market, and to ensure that the work done in UAE is with the right people, and the right sort of customers. The fight against financial crime, I've got to say, and then the other question that typically comes out is, but I'm just a jeweler. Isn't this the police's job? Isn't this the judiciary's job? But really, the fight against financial crime cannot be done by one particular agency, can't be done by one particular sector. You will find that even traditionally, but even now, the fight against financial crime requires a collective effort, and for that, there's lots of different organizations, even within the UAE, helping coordinate some of this. Nick and myself, we participate quite regularly on the private-public partnership that was recently set up for AML that helps coordinate some of these activities as well. But really, it's not just, oh yeah, it's the police's job, or it's a customs job, or it's the judiciary's job, or it's a financial services organization's job. Traditionally, a lot of this burden did fall on the financial services organizations. You would have faced that because your banks would have been asking questions from you. Where are your suppliers? What's the business? Or there's a sudden increase in business. Why is that? All of those questions sometimes is actually feeding into that financial crime assessment that the banks are doing. Increasingly, and especially in the UAE, over the last couple of years, the obligations of the DNFBPs, so the designated non-financial businesses and professions, have increased significantly. And this is in line with what we've seen in a lot of other countries. This is in line with the assessments, the sector risk assessments that the UAE has done. We'll stick on the previous slide, Anton. The gold and dealers in precious metals, I should say, as a governing sort of area, has been identified as one of the key risk areas. That's why there's a lot of focus on that. Now you can say, hang on, why isn't fine art considered, etc. But this is what UAE has considered as high risk at this moment. Anton, if you can stay on the previous slide. Thank you. And then that's one of the key reasons. The other key reasons is the grey listing, and you probably would have seen a lot about this over the last few months. UAE has been placed on the FATF grey list. That's a fairly significant negative news for the UAE, and I know the UAE is very keen to get out of this grey list as quickly as possible. And a lot of this work is towards that. But I think what's also key to mention is that it's not just about getting out of a grey list. This is not a activity that's going to be, let's just do it for the next year. We'll show the FATF and other international organizations that we've been we've done all this work and then we'll fall away and we don't have to worry about it. These things are not going to go away. This is the way that work is going to be done in UAE in the future. And Abid will, I'm sure, speak in detail about that, how this will be the new normal really for the refiners and other actors in this area. You will continue to see continued high vigilance from UAE from a governmental level on these sectors. And that probably means that you'll see Abid quite a lot on inspections and other things over the next few years. And I can always see Mamta smiling at that. But that's the reality. And that is what prompted a lot of changes in the financial services sector as well, where the regulators started taking a lot of these actions. And that is why you see there's requirements for third-party due diligence. There's requirements to report those to the regulator in the Ministry of Economy in this case, and that's really for at a governmental level to have that tightened control and tightened regulation. Anton, if you go to the next slide. So I think why gold is one of the key questions that keep coming up. It's really based on some of the key risk assessments that's been done globally and especially in UAE as well, which is done very sector specific risk assessments in the past. It's done a national risk assessment in the past as well. And gold and other precious metals, I should say, has been increasingly high, come up as a heightened risk. And that's simply because it's very easy to launder money and use gold as a vehicle for other financial crimes. It's easily convertible to cash. It holds value, so it doesn't lose value, over time. And we saw what happened with the sort of the Indian rupee a few years ago, where the government decided actually we're going to change the currency notes, and a lot of money was sort of the black money was not necessarily lost in that. But gold is not something that will ever happen. Nothing like that will ever happen to gold. That's why gold, diamonds, and other precious metals cement one of those things that's very, very attractive to money launderers, but also fraudsters, also sort of, people who are stealing money. So everyone in that whole area of financial crime is very interested in gold. Now, when we come to AML, we typically talk about 3 stages. One is placement, which is sort of put in your illicit cash, the cash that's ill-gotten into the system. We talk about layering, which is sort of moving the cash around to make sure that you conceal its source, where it's come from originally. And then you get integration, which is bringing the money back through a legal transaction. And within gold, you can do really all these things, especially when it comes to layering and integration. It's very easy to hide the source of the cash when it comes to gold. It's very easy to show gold transactions, whether it's jewelries or gold bars, etc., and having those integration back into the system is very easy, which is why gold in particular has been highlighted here. Regulations are really here to try and stop the bad actors, and ensure that there's a level playing field within UAE, and ensuring that UAE does not get bad press. UAE is not seen as a country that enables this sort of financial crime to take place. In particular, I want to highlight KHRA, KARA, which is sort of gold originating from conflict affected and high risk areas. Of course, it's one of the areas where it's very hard to judge what the origins are. They pose a significant risk to the UAE. And Anton will go into a little bit more detail about that, talking about KARA later on. Anton, if you go on to the next slide. So what does this mean to you? And I know Abid is going to go into a lot of detail, but really, who does it apply to, and what does it mean? It applies to everyone here, everyone in the gold refinery business, and that includes everyone in free zone. So don't think that, oh, yeah, I'm in a free zone, so I must get a different set of regulations. This is actually applicable for everyone in the refinery business. So that I believe, when Abid will confirm this, I believe that is everyone who has a refinery as in the trade license would fall into that. So this is really to enable that broader compliance, right? So this sits among a lot of other different regulations and guidances that's been issued at a federal level, and also by the Ministry of Economy for the gold sector and other sectors. So this is just one of those pillars that enable the Ministry of Economy to discharge their duties. Lastly, and I want to touch on this a little bit, is the sanctions for non-compliance. Some of these penalties can be quite high, and they're designed to be quite high because it's designed to make sure that people comply with that. I think that's quite key, and I think you'll see one of the things that the UAE got criticized for over the past few years is the lack of sanctions. The lack of sanctions against bad actors, whether it's the financial services field or other fields. And if you read the FATF report, you'll see that's one of the key criticisms that's there. So you can expect to see heightened supervision and heightened sanctions by the regulators on these areas. Anton, the next slide, if you don't mind. This is the flow, and if anyone's read the regulations, you'll be familiar with it because this is a representation of that. Everything really starts with establishing an effective governance system, establishing how you deal with the regulations, how, and not just this regulation, but your federal AML regulations as well should be considered, but really establishing that framework that enables you to operate. Each of you will be slightly different in how you operate, your activities, your focus areas, and this governance system helps set what that means for you. And you have a risk assessment at this point to ensure that nothing's missed out. You've considered all of the risks. Next, you go into the two areas, which is the assessment of the supply chain risk and the management of that. Now, that's where really identifying the key risk within the supply chain, making sure that you got controls in place that really identify some of these key risk areas. If it's high risk, is there additional things to do? And all of that comes into play here. And then the next sort of element or the pillar, I would say, is having that independent third party audit. And we'll go into that in a little bit, but really this is to enable that there's a third party who's not connected with your business, looking at what you've done, making sure that that's up to scratch. It complies with the regulation. There's a list of third-party auditors as well, which we posted on our chat, which you can see as well. But the timeline for that is a little bit further away. You've also then got the annual reporting back to the ministry on these things, on the third-party audit and some of these other areas, which is really to help the ministry understand what's going on in the ground. And lastly, Anton, if you go to the next slide, not to alarm everyone, but some of these deadlines are coming up pretty fast, which means that everyone here has to move fairly quickly to really understand the regulation and ensure that it's implemented and ready to go. The deadlines given on the regulation is that entities are expected to be in line from 1st of Jan 2023, which means that, it doesn't mean that you only have to start looking at this on the 1st of Jan 2023, because these few months is critical to enable you to change your processes, establish what needs to happen under the new regulations, put the processes in place, have those gap assessments done, and we'll go through in the last slide on how to do that. But really, all of those pillars need to be in place, starting now over the next month or so, really to ensure that it's working and that therefore you're compliant from 1st of Jan onwards. You then have a 12-month cycle that before your first sort of third-party audit kick in. So it'll be Jan 2024 when you will start your first third-party audit. And then you then also have a few more months after that to actually submit these reports to the ministry. And that's really sometimes given so that you get time to review the report in detail. Of course, it takes a little bit of time to do the report as well. Review the report in detail, ensure it's correct. Also, maybe take some corrective actions if there's been gaps identified already, so that you can go back to the ministry with, yes, there's gaps identified. We've already done X, Y, Z to fix it. That's you looked at in a better way through that. That's the sort of the key areas that I wanted to cover, Nick, on the first thing. Back to you, Nick, on that.
Yeah, thanks, Sach. Yeah, although January 2023 is only a few months away. So I would encourage everyone to act now with those gap assessments and analysis to understand what improvements are needed. Good. I'm now going to hand it over to Anton. Anton is a corporate intelligence and third-party risk management specialist operating with us at KPMG. He runs this function, and he's going to talk to us about CARA, which is the conflict-affected and high-risk areas. So over to you, Anton.
Thanks, Nick. I hope everyone can hear me well.
Anton, I think you put yourself back on mute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is one of the central concepts in the new regulations, really, such as already touched based on this. But essentially, as the name suggests, CARA is really a geographical area with the prevalence of armed conflict, violence, and as a result, weak governance, and different problems related to human rights, corruption, and other sort of malpractice. So on the right-hand side is a very brief overview of how CARAs should be dealt with according to the new regulations. So first off, entities falling under the new regulations should establish an effective governance framework to be able to analyze and identify risks related to CARAs. And one of the most important things is establishing a KYC procedure to be able to run due diligence on your supply chain elements to make sure that you're able to identify whether or not you have any gold that was originated from or transported through a country that is considered to be CARA. And if you are able to reasonably establish that you do not have any gold that was transported through CARA or originated through CARA, that process can be concluded. However, if you do identify certain gold or supply chain elements that are involved in CARA, those will need to be subjected to enhanced due diligence, which is essentially the sort of next level KYC procedure, which is wider in scope and deeper, and can include such elements, for example, as human source inquiries, site visits, and enhanced sort of reviews of adverse media that would pertain to the supply chain elements. So one of the central questions that might arise is sort of how does one determine what CARA is in the first place? And really, there is no official list that would be sort of official and comprehensive. And one of the reasons is that, for example, OECD argues that compiling such an official list would be counterproductive. And one of the main reasons is that because CARAs keep changing and evolving over time, and then that can be a really quick process. But really, there's some sources that can be used as indicative sources that you can use and check certain countries through. So on the slide, there's a few examples of sources that can be used for that purpose, in addition to the others that may be available. So we will share this presentation around so that you could, have this indicative list. So now we are heading over to Abid, who's going to take us through the actual processes that are dictated by the new regulations.
Thanks, Anton. And Abid, looking forward to hearing your insights on the 5 pillars as the regulator and expert here. Just for everyone's sake, before we jump into that, we will have time for a Q&A session at the end of this session. Just please do note that we are recording the session for your colleagues and other market participants that can't join us at this time. But please add your questions to the chat as we go, and then we'll have time to answer them at the end. But Abid, welcome. Good to see you, and I'm looking forward to hearing your insights.
Thank you, KPMG team. Thank you, Dubai Jewellery Group, for giving me this opportunity. I want to say something before I start. I know for some of you, I might be already a boring face because you have seen me more than twice in last 2 months. So I've been engaging with the sector. So we had called for outreach with the refinery industry, and some of you came for that. And recently, MOE have also done a general AML perspective for the DPMS sector. So some of you might have seen me more than twice already. So, but yeah, there are other people who are new, so I'll have to do it. Some of the content might be repetitive. And as some of you know, I've been with the industry, so I'm a very understanding regulator. So I know how the industry works. Some of you must have dealt with me in the past. So yeah, I'm not someone who came from Mars and trying to put something in place. So I understand the industry. I try to engage with the industry as much as possible wherever it is really possible. Okay, and I wanted to add a few things on what Sajid covered. Sajid, one thing is things are changing and things are changing very fast. So when you said about the what do you say the implementation or the penalties and fines part have been an observation in FATF, you'll see a change very soon because I've been attending an event 2 days back, and people from FATF said UAE is one of the countries who comes in the top 5 or top 10 when it comes to enforcement. And so things are changing very fast, and the fines and the confiscation of assets are happening at a very high pace. So it's not very public because UAE does not believe in the naming and shaming scenarios. So that is why you cannot hear a lot of news about it, but things are happening. So I just wanted to make it very clear so that everyone understand the gravity of the issue, the matter. Another thing I wanted to just add a practical example which have happened, which came in some of the articles before, but to give the industry a perspective about what Sajid was telling about the process of money laundering. So there was a case, it was a few years back, wherein the drug money or narcotic money from the Northern America was transferred to Europe, and they used it to buy some used cars, trucks, and all from Europe, and they shipped it to Africa. And from Africa, they bought gold against it after liquidating the used cars and stuff, and they send the gold to UAE. And then they, by the sale proceed of the gold, they got the money back into the financial system. So we might not be aware, we might not see it because what we see is just some gold coming in from Africa and we just buying the gold and making the payment. So that is where AML becomes a very important thing because once you get into it, it's very difficult to get out. So the extent of damage is unbelievable. So I've seen it live. That's why I'm telling you. Some of you might not have still not understood the gravity of things, but yeah, it will be very difficult once you get into it. As I told you, I don't want to scare you. I'm a very friendly regulator. I know the industry. I've worked, so I come from the industry. So it's very obvious that I understand your issues. So yeah, and I'll try to help, try to engage wherever possible. And yeah, so that is what I want to give as a precursor. Anton, can we move to the first slide? Yeah, so the first step or the main thing when it comes to the responsible sourcing is having a framework. So the framework starts by having a policy. So as MOE, not in this case, but as a regulator for the DPMS sector, I've been in the background or in the friend itself for some of the inspections. And a common observation is that people just find a policy from somewhere and they just copy paste it. It doesn't work because some policies might be very big, comprehensive. I've seen a policy 35 page, but nothing relevant to you. So if you are accepting something as your policy, you should know what is in there and you should be doing it. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. So just for having a policy, if you have something that doesn't serve the purpose and that doesn't help you as well as us. So you have to make policies. I'm not saying you should invent policies. That's also not possible. Everyone adapts and inspires from something and do things. So it's okay if you get inspirations from other policies, but it's never right to do this by just copying a policy and pasting it, just putting your entity's name on top. Because I've seen even cases where the regulator's name were different because they copied from some other jurisdiction. So they forgot to change the regulator's name. So yeah, this doesn't work. This doesn't help anyone. So you have to put in efforts to understand that the policy is relevant, not just have a policy. For the rest of the DNFPB sector, there are limitations. We have a huge requirement for compliance professionals. So we do understand we everyone might not get the absolute right match, but you should have a compliance officer who understands the overall scheme of things, and especially if it is to do with responsible sourcing, it's a slightly different ball game. When an outsider look, when people from outside our industry look, both of them, the regular AML requirements and the supply chain requirements might look similar, but it is not the same. So you should have people who can understand both the aspects, the AML aspects as well as the responsible sourcing aspect, because there are differences. So you should either develop in-house capabilities. If you are identifying someone within your organization to be your compliance officer, you should find ways, give them trainings, and make them understand what is the requirement. So that is very important. Or you can get someone from outside. But as I told you, it's difficult. I do understand there is a genuine concern that enough compliance officers are not available in the market. And it's not something you can get a college graduate or something like that. There is no specific designed what to say course or something like that. So it comes eventually you need to have a very strong understanding about the compliance framework and compliance requirement, as well as you need to understand the industry and the industry requirement. So getting a right combination of both is difficult. We do understand that, but it's not an excuse for not doing it. So how fast you can equip your team or your compliance officer to be um, adequately trained and someone who understands things is very important, because you don't have much time left. As my friends from KPMG was telling you, you don't have a lot of time. So the requirement is kicking in on 1st of Jan 2023. So yeah, if at all you need some help, some better understanding, I'm always there to help as a regulator. But yeah, my job is not just to give a particular training to a particular compliance officer, but in general, if there is a requirement, please reach out to us. We are always ready to help. Then you these are the basic two important things when it comes to the first pillar, which is having a process, having a framework. Then we'll go to the other steps subsequently, but this is the first thing. This is the base of everything. So you need to be very careful on this. So you need to have a system, you need to have enough people, you need to have resources. Other than people, you should have systems, because When it comes to, as I told you, it's slightly different from the AML framework because the AML framework have minimum requirements. You need to screen against the UN sanction list as well as the UAE sanction list, and that's it. That's the only requirement, legal requirement on your side. But when it comes to supply, responsible sourcing, supply chain due diligence, it does not stop there. It's a bit more wider because you are dealing with international counterparts. So you need to understand your counterpart and your supply chain very well. Otherwise, you will end up in difficulties. And it is out of experience. And yeah, I call myself the first compliance officer in the DNFPP sector in UAE because when I became a compliance officer, I don't think there was any other compliance officer in, at least in our sector. So with their experience, I'm talking, you will end up in difficulties if you don't have the right view or right approach towards your international counterparts. So you need to, and again, this is a risk-based approach. So I'll come to the step 2. So yeah, so these are the 5 steps. So you need to, I think it was already covered. You need to have a framework and a governance system. You need to have a risk assessment methodology and framework. Then you need to have a plan for how to address the identified risk, then a third-party audit, and the reports to be provided to Ministry of Economy. So I think Sajid already covered. And then I think I'm taking too much of time. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, so I think I covered most of it. So I'm available at the end of the session if you have any particular doubt. And Anton have extensively covered the high risk, conflict affected and high risk areas. So I don't think I need to go into details on that. So the effectiveness and having a effective system is what I mentioned. And there should be a governance system as well. So yeah, you have a wonderful system, but your governance system is not there. So what you mean by governance system is, I know some of you are very experienced and it might not be very interesting for you, but there are newcomers in the session. I was looking at the list. So I think it is essential to cover. So by means of governance system, what I mean is that you need to have approvals and a system wherein there are clearly defined responsibility at different levels. So your compliance officer is the gatekeeper, but again, compliance officer takes decisions according to the risk uh, appetite of the organization. So the final responsibility always lies at the management of the organization. So your policy should be approved by your senior management. Again, your decisions on your high risk customers should be taken at the management level, and you need to have regular interactions with your management team. If the compliance guy is excellent, he knows everything, and if the management doesn't understand half the things, then it does not help, because the company is his responsibility, though the gatekeeper is the compliance officer. So the understanding and awareness of the management of the company is very important. So you need to have a proper governance structure which enables this. Next, please, Andrew. So, okay, I'm not reading out the slide because you will anyway get the slides, but I'll talk things in a general perspective. So risk assessment is the crux of the whole thing, because this is a system which is risk based. So everything is based on the risk assessment. If you don't identify a risk, then you're blindsided. So you are facing something which you don't know. So it is very important that you have a proper risk assessment system so that you are identifying the risk. And if you don't identify the risk, then you are not meeting the purpose. So if I don't want to take names, but I can tell you instances where people take it very lightly. People consider everything to be locally sourced, so there is no risk. No, that doesn't help you. And you cannot go ahead with that. That does not work. So you have to identify the risks in your supply chain. So you need to understand what kind of risks are there. So broadly speaking, the risks are money laundering risk. So if anyone or the actors in your supply chain are using you as a mechanism for laundering their ill-acquired proceeds, then there is conflict financing or so in that I think Anton covered the high risk conflict affected and high risk areas pretty well. So you have to identify if this is there in your supply chain. Then you have human rights related issues. So yeah, everything is clean, but the minus not paying the workers, the minus having child labor or women abuse. Mining happens mostly in the third world countries, and the conditions are bad. It's not fully your responsibility, but it comes as a factor in your risk assessment. So you have to identify this kind of risks. Then the fourth risk is the environmental related. ESG is a big thing nowadays. So environmental related issues. So how the waste is treated, how the mining operation is running, what is the production process, and what kind of chemicals are used. Yeah, so these are broadly, very broadly, these are the four risks that can happen in your supply chain, and you have to have measures to identify this risk. That is step two. So how it has to be done, as I told you, this is not a normal financial audit. You have to understand that. So it's not a situation where there are numbers, the auditor comes and just calculate and find out things. And no, this is more of things which people like Sajid and Anton do. It is more like a cooperative investigation kind of situation. So I'll come to the audit details later. So you have to have a mechanism to identify the risk in your supply chain. And then next. So I'm trying to cover as much as possible. So sorry if I'm rushing through it. So the third step is the management of the risk identified. So as I told you, these are generally the risks which can be there in your supply chain. Once you identify this risk, how you mitigate it, how do you manage it? First of all, it's the management decision. The risk appetite is different for different companies. So as I told you, some people might be ready to engage with certain kind of risks. So the best way is zero risk is no business. Okay, so we do understand that if you are doing business, there will be some risks. So we are not saying that you cannot engage with any kind of risk. No, that is not the intention here. So the thing is, you should identify the risk and have mitigative measures to address this risk. So yeah, if it is an AML risk, you identify all those actors in your supply chain and do enhanced due diligence on them and come up with a situation there you can convince the auditor, you can justify that none of the players in my supply chain are involved. So if it is a high risk country on AML, then if your players in the supply chain or your stakeholders are all clean and you can establish that, then that is how you mitigate the the measure. And yeah, I it's not nothing to do with the picture, but in Anton's image, India was on yellow color, which means there is conflict risk in India. But I believe most of you are Indians, so we know there are certain pockets in India where it is having some conflict issues, but there are places where there are no conflict issues. So if you can establish that, yes, I have identified India as having conflict issues, but my source is from location X, where there are no conflicts for last X years. So that is how you mitigate identified risk. So you should have mitigation measures to say that, yes, there I have identified this risk, but my mitigation measure is this. So yeah, there are clear guidance if you go through the rules about how or what is the expected minimum. And expected minimum means you just don't do a tick box exercise saying that, yes, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, that's it. No. So that is the minimum. You can do more. So the depending upon your risk appetite, you can decide where to engage, where not to engage, and if you engage, what to do. So that is the management of the supply chain risk identified. Enter next. So the audit, again, when it comes to audit, yeah, you need to engage with a third-party auditor. So you cannot audit yourself. It's not an internal audit. You need to have a third-party auditor. The list is provided, a link to the list is provided in the website. You can go there, click and find who are the auditors. And yeah, how you do it, I'm trying to cover as fast as possible, but I'm sure I must have missed something. If anything, please reach out or ask me during the Q&A. So you define what is the scope of the audit, and you prepare, you discuss and agree with your auditor what you're looking for and what is that you are expecting out of it. And then you decide the audit activity, what is the scope, how much time it is going to take, what are the activities the auditor is going to do, and what kind of documents are expected from your side, and what are the documents that you expect from the auditors, all those things. Then the audit this is an assurance audit, and it is based on ISA 3000 standard. So how it works is the company who is getting audited prepares a compliance report. So you will say, like, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, and because I've done all this, I claim myself to be compliant or non-compliant or whatever it is. Then the auditor comes, he examines, he reads your compliance report, he examines whatever is available for him for audit. So it might have document review, interviews, he might come and observe your premise, he might want to see what you're doing, how it happens in life, all those things. And finally, he gives a statement, sorry, saying whether what you said in your compliance report is correct, he agrees, or he disagrees. So I don't want to go into technical details. So there can be an emphasis on matters or not. So yeah, basically he'll say whether he agrees to you or not. Along with that, there is a third report, which is called a management report. So when you submit your documents, your reports to MOE, this also needs to be submitted. So basically a management report is a report which the auditor gives to the auditee, explaining the whole process, his observations and everything. So it's a very detailed report, but MOE wants to see that as well, because between the compliance report and the assurance statement, there might be things missing. So the management report will give a better perspective, and we would like to get that as well. So that is about the third-party audit, and the final step is just simple. You submit the reports to us. So these are the things which should be covered in the report. So the steps 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, and 3. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Abid. Very good. And obviously we're going through this reasonably quickly. We will make the slides available. And thanks, Abid, for offering to take some questions at the end and afterwards. I'm sure they'll be needed. But quickly moving on with Mamta, I'm very keen to hear from you about what all of this means for some of your members and how it's going to change the way that many in this sector do business. Welcome.
Thank you, Nick. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mamta. I represent the Dubai Jewelry Group. So I'll be speaking from the jeweler's perspective, what the new regulation will entail for the jewelry sector, different players. I'll quickly take you through the key changes that you need to make in your businesses to comply with the new regulation. If the question is who has to comply with the regulation, practically everyone, all players in the supply chain. But one fundamental question that we may need to ask ourselves and find out within our entities would be, what is the nature of our business and how complex is the activities? So just for understanding purpose, we can probably divide this into two. One is DPMS, that is dealers in precious metals and stones. That is essentially the jewelers, could be manufacturers, retailers, wholesalers, everyone in the supply chain. And the other is refineries. So, and when I say refineries, it would also mean if you have refining as an activity in your trade license. So essentially, your obligations would change depending on which category you belong to. So if you are a jeweler, just a DPMS, then the complexity and the obligations under this new regulation might be slightly different from a refiner. For example, the last two steps of the whole process that you need to follow, that is appointing an external independent auditor and submitting the report to Ministry of Economy, you may not need to do if you are just a jeweler. However, you are supposed to do everything that preceding to these steps, that is developing your governance system, identifying the risk and everything related to your risk assessment, your continuous compliance procedures, and your KYC, enhanced due diligence, everything you're supposed to do. If you're a jeweler, your obligation will essentially be revolving around your immediate supplier and your customer. However, if you are a refiner, it will cover the entire supply chain from the origin to the last delivery point. So these are the fundamental differences that we need to understand. And understanding our business, the nature, the core business, and the complexity of the nature of your business will help you in developing the correct governance system, as Abid mentioned. It cannot be copy pasted from somewhere and not being followed. That it's not going to be entertained by the regulator moving forward. Compliance has to be developed as a culture within your organization. Every step of your business should consider the compliance regulations and the perspective of complying with these moving forward. So if your question is, do I have to comply with this? Yes. If you are a jeweler, at some point in time or to some degree, you will have to comply, but depending on the nature of your activity. It would be nice to consider if you have to have refining as an activity in your trade license. If you are not an active refiner, it would be wiser to amend your trade license, because moving forward, a lot of regulations, the tougher regulations, regulations of high degree will come on to you if you are practically a refiner. So it is up to the jeweler, the DPMS, to consider these factors while forming their policies. So that's pretty much it from my side. This is from a jeweler's perspective. The last two steps, like appointing an auditor and doing the audit and submitting the reports, may not be required from a jeweler's perspective. But however, refiners and anyone who has refining as an activity will be subject to that. So now Sashit will take you through the roadmap that we are trying to achieve in complying with the new regulations. Sashit, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mamta. Anthony, if you go to the next slide, and as Abid's mentioned before, we've done lots of work in this region. We work with lots of organizations in helping them through regulatory change. Regulatory change, and again, Abid mentioned this. It's coming fast. It's thick and fast. It's a lot of changes, and it's important to look at these in a structured manner and as quickly as possible in order to ensure that you remain compliant. The more time you have to really assess, and implement some of these changes, the more effective you'll be and the more cost efficient you can be as well. We had a situation where in the financial services sector, where there was a regulation where a change needed to be happen on the reporting deadlines. The banks who stayed, ignored this news for the longest time ended up bearing the biggest cost because they had to change things very quickly. So I would highly recommend that people, if we've not done this already, start looking at this as soon as possible because you only got 2 months, and that's including December. Again, one of your busy periods over December. So you really don't have too much time on this. We follow a fairly standard methodology as KPMG when we go in and help companies manage regulatory change, and we can help you on these as well. So we start with the gap assessment, and this is really looking at what do you currently do against what does the regulations do. And that's fairly sort of standard process. It's fairly simple to say, yes, this regulation asks for this. Do you do this? And is that up to what we think regulatory scrutiny will be? We then go on to what a remediation plan would be. So that's really ranking those gaps, identifying which gaps are critical gaps, which gaps might be, some of them might be good to have gaps, some of them might require a lot of effort and change, and really a ranking of those gaps so that you can address those quick low-hanging fruits very quickly, and then really go on to some of the key areas as well. You obviously then go on to your remediation exercise. So that's based on your remediation plan, implement those controls in place. This might mean changing your processes. This might mean changing or training up some of the people who are on the front line within your business to say, I know this is what you did, but you now got to do this, these additional things, or these things differently. This is the things you have to look out for. All of those things need to come in place. And then lastly, once everything's in place, it's the monitoring and reporting, which we also do as sort of a managed service as well to help companies monitor and report over over your period. And that helps take away some of that compliance burden away, some of that compliance processing burden away. I think we've just about finished on time. And we've got a few questions up as well. And I would encourage anyone to quickly put down your questions on the chat. I can see 2 questions at the moment. I'll address the first one towards Abid, if that's all right. Abid, it's questions from Aditya Prasad asking, we import only finished goods, so bullion bars and limit minted bars. We do not import any raw gold, and we do not have any refining or metal processing in UAE. Do these regulations impact us as well? I know Mamta covered it very briefly, but I'll give it to you for a different flavor.
Yeah, I think Mamta covered it pretty well. So yeah, the audit part does not apply to you. So then there is no need for submitting the audited compliance report to the regulator. But yeah, in general, the other 3 steps applies to you, but there is no need of an audit.
Thank you, Abid. I think that's very clear. I think the next one is again very similar, but in the interest of covering that off, it's from Ritesh Kumar. What are the obligations of a retail jeweler under this new regulation? Maybe Mamta, you can share. I know you've spoken about this, but maybe just very quickly.
Yes, the first 3 steps, yes, you will have to comply to. One is developing your own company's governance system. You might be already having essentially your AML CFT framework, and this will be a complementary framework that you need to create for your organization to comply with the new regulation, particularly on the sourcing of gold. And second would be conducting due diligence through your supply chain. So everything that is related to like KYC, due diligence and enhanced due diligence, everything will be part of this step. And then they will be addressing the risk once identified. There could be, the regulation details certain steps like establish whether you have to take a call on whether to establish, continue, terminate, or suspend your relation with a very high risk clientele or client or supply chain partner. These 3 steps essentially you will have to understand. And another thing is you will have to keep on monitoring, the continuous monitoring of your policies, and changes are required. at every point. So it is not a one-time exercise that you create a policy, you do your risk assessment and leave it. It's not that way. It is a continuous process. So yes, as a retail jeweler, you are supposed to do the first 3 steps. The last 2, like as I mentioned, appointing the auditor, conducting the third-party audit, and submitting to Ministry of Economy. Yes, you don't need to do that.
Thank you, Mamta. That's very clear that it needs to be a live document. Abid, I know you got your hand up, so
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to what Mamta just said. Yes, she was very correct in what she said. But yeah, when you say retail jeweler, as I told you, this is a risk-based approach. So when you say retail jeweler, is your activity just retailing of jewelry or not? That's where the risk assessment is important. So you have to do a self-assessment. You have to do a risk assessment on yourself and identify what risks you are facing, as well as you have to conduct risk assessment on your suppliers, customers, etc. So if you are just selling jewelry in retail counters, then your risks are comparatively lower. But if you are involved in exchange of jewelry, if you are involved in more activities, then it have a different risk perspective. So it depends on what your activity is. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Abid. And we've got 3 more questions, and maybe I'll come to you on those because the questions are largely the same. They're sort of specifying what activities they do and want to know how that impacts them. So it might be sort of a way that we need to actually look at that they need to look at the regulation. But the 3 sort of different activities that people have highlighted, Him's highlighted bullion bar trading and asking how that applies. And then Mohammed said that the trade license says precious metals and jewelry trading, but jewelry is not the main focus. So what does he do? And then lastly, Sabs mentioned that they export finished goods and receive gold bars against payments. And then how does that impact? So it's really these different types of activities. How does that impact? Maybe it's an overall answer that you can give on these.
Yeah, so I think I gave part of the answer in my previous comment. So you have to do a self-assessment of your risk. What are the risks that you as an organization is facing? And depending upon your self-assessment, that will give you a fair bit of idea about what you should do. So when you identify risk, you have to address it. So yeah, irrespective of what your activity is, whether you are doing it jewelry, bullion bars, or minted products, whatever it is, you have to identify, as I told in the previous answer as well. So if you are doing just a retail business, that means you should only the incoming, whether it is physical cash or through card payments or through banks, should be cash or cash equivalent. But if you are involved in other aspects, exchange of goods and all those, so on a general perspective, for DPMS sector, you have to do a risk assessment based on the geographical location, so where your customers are based. Then you have to do a KYC. You have to do a risk assessment based on your delivery channels, whether you are doing online, offline, what if, yeah, just to give you a very brief understanding, if you have a face-to-face customer, your risk levels are comparatively lower rather than you having a non-face-to-face situation. So you have to consider, and there is very clear guidelines on that, how to do your self-risk assessment. You do a self-assessment of your risks, and then you decide how to address if you have identified any risk. So that is, in general, that's the answer I can give. If there is anything specific, yeah.
Yeah, I think thanks, Abid. I'll just jump in here. I think one of we're sort of running out of time and people are starting to drop away, but I think that's quite clear, and perhaps we can we can assist with defining some of those different areas to bring more clarity as well to some of the participants moving forward. I think the other point to note is this need not be overly complex in a lot of situations, right? The risk assessments and the KYC. I know that Anton has set up a managed service to assist many of the clients within the sector to be able to very quickly run both KYC and enhanced due diligence using lots of different data sources and technology. So please do get in touch if you need assistance with that or any risk assessment and so forth. But I think the applicability points, Abid, are the common recurring theme here. So maybe we'll think about how we can bring some more clarity and help you to do that. Good. Are there any other questions, Sach, that we want to deal with before we sign off?
I think maybe the last one that says, should risk assessment be done on all retail customers? I think, Mamta, maybe you can have that last one, and then we can try and wrap that up. Yes,
risk assessment should be done as a part of your general AML CFT framework for every actor in the supply chain. So customer is a part of the supply chain. You will need to do essentially a primary risk assessment. Yes, everyone. You need to, this is how you incorporate the clients also into the whole framework. You do sanction screening, you do your PEP screening, everything is part of your risk assessment. Yes, you will need to do that.
Abid, that just to follow up that.
Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to add, Mamta, in the retail scenario, how we view it is if you are doing sale of jewelry products on a regular basis, small ticket sizes, then yeah, you cannot collect the KYC document for everyone who's walking into your stores. Yes, we do understand that. So what the regulation requires from you is if the transaction is more than the specified amount, which is 55,000 dirhams, then you are obliged. Otherwise, unless there is no suspicious type of activities, same customer coming 10 times to your shop and buying stuff for 10,000 dirhams, that is suspicious. So that is again depending upon everything to do with compliance is probably risk-based. So unless you don't have any suspicious occurrence, then yeah, you don't need to do all the requirements for a regular or for a normal walk-in customer to your retail store. Yeah, the regulation is very clear on that. So you can see, and there are differences between individuals and legal person, I mean companies. So you have to identify what is your counterpart, whether it's a natural person or a legal person, and the obligations are slightly different. So yeah, I don't want to get it more.
We've got a few more questions, but I think we're at about 10 minutes over. So maybe we can get back to some of these participants with those questions answered afterwards. Maybe Anton, we can just note that and send something across after we speak to Abid as well. Nick, across to you just for closing.
No, thanks, Sach. I'd like to thank Abid and Mamta for their participation within the seminar and webinar, and Sach and Anton as well. We'll close it there. We will take note of the questions that are coming in the chat and we'll respond directly to you. We will also distribute the slides. We've got the list of those who have joined, and